Buddy, thank you for joining us. I think we've got a little bit of delay going on there. Welcome. My name's Zach Gribble. As Edward was saying, I'm a subject specialist with GSK in digital practice and looking at a lot of platforms. We're just going to turn our cameras on so you've got an idea of the faces behind the voice. And please don't judge me. I don't live in a castle. About 20 minutes ago, my internet at home departed, and I had to make a quick run to site B. So, all glad everything seems to be working now. But that's this is myself, Zach, and this is John Sumter, who is got his camera on as well. We'll turn the cameras off in a minute. We're not going to keep them on through the whole time. But we just wanted to welcome you. Wanted to, as Edward said, hopefully this is more of a discussion. We want to encourage you to put some thoughts and some ideas into the chat pane on the left hand side, and we will have some questions to bring up as well, and try and get a little bit more in depth thinking around some of these thoughts, talking about using digital tools and confidence, and some of the decisions you need to make around using digital tools in teaching and learning. What I'll do is I'll just turn off our cameras there so you don't have to look at us so much now. The first thing we'd really like you to do is we quite often ask where people are coming from, and we thought we'd make it slightly different. So if John's going to bring up some tools on the left hand side of your screen, you should see a T, and what we would like you to do is just click on the T and click on the map, whereabouts you're coming from, where you're joining from us today. So I'm just going to put mine in there. Let's have a look, see where everyone's coming from. Fantastic. So we're all quite a good spread. Excellent. Give you a couple more minutes just to put those in. Where it feels like. Excellent. Fantastic. Right, we'll just let last couple go in there. But we are here to talk about the innovation and the opportunities that digital brings into the sector, particularly around the teaching and learning tools, and how people can be encouraged and supported through their journey into using those tools. And this has been a big part of the work that the subject specialist team that John and I are both in. We've been involved for a long time, way before the coronavirus outbreak. Yeah, but as we'll discuss with the changes that virus has made to the sector, it feels quite important to go over some of the discussion around why digital tools are important, but also which tools, how and why tools are chosen. The wrong tools or the wrong reasons can have a huge impact on the learners, the educators, and the institution. And obviously, with the COVID situation, there are huge gaps to bridge. And I say bridge, not fill. I think that there's with the coronavirus, that it's created lots of gaps. But I think lots of these tools can help bridge over those gaps until maybe we return to other ways. And to be clear, in this webinar, I'm not suggesting that digital tools should fully replace the teaching done with educators, but I feel they can be enablers, enhancing learning, or as I said, help bridge the gap that is created, particularly when we're asking students not to be on campus. So just looking at the session, this really came about from a blog post that I wrote a few weeks back now, which seemed to get a lot of people reading it, as well as some of the comments that came up in a recent webinar. John's just going to pop into the chat there a link to the blog post if you wanted to read it at a different time. And we thought it would be nice to expand on the blog post in this setting and involve you in the conversation. So we wanted to cover a few areas that we see when discussing tools and platforms with our members. And I just think it's worth pointing out here at the moment that there's some benefit to distinguishing a platform like a VLE or intranet from what we're calling a tool, like a polling tool or a collaborative application. And there are some that could be classed as both a tool and a platform. So in this webinar, so when I'm saying tools in teaching and learning, I'm thinking of applications or functionality that may be embedded within the VLE or used alongside it. So we're going to bring up our first question, really, and just to get it started, and could you put into a few words and describe the use of digital tools in your organization? Yeah, are they widely used across the organization? Are there pockets of use by some, but the majority stick to Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or something like that? How has it changed since the lockdowns begun? And also, actually, do you consider yourself or your team to be different from the rest of your organization? Sporadic, yeah, Claire, yeah. Sporadic, varied, not always used to full potential. Yeah, I think that's a very big point, Robin. Yeah, and we'll talk a bit about that. Microsoft Teams. Change is massive. Previously, just desktop. Yeah.
Zach, do you mind if I come in here just quickly?
Yeah, please, John. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. As Zach said, I'm John, so welcome, everyone. I just thought I'd highlight that obviously we're getting some good comments here, and the word sporadic and others that are similar. We're seeing a lot of that, obviously, because we get contacted by our members, such as yourself. We're seeing a lot of communication from people trying, and institutions trying to move away from that sporadic nature in their use of tools. And it is difficult because, of course, in these unprecedented times, everyone's been pushed in so quickly, and it's difficult to keep everyone running along the same track. But it can be done. But you're not alone if you feel that there's a huge disparity across in your institution. So you're not alone. It's worth knowing.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's really important. There was a comment that I saw quite high up. Claire, you said it's unplanned. I think that's a really interesting point, and the fact that I think there was another comment a bit further down saying many staff feeling overwhelmed by digital technologies. Is that and we'll talk about that in a second, about how the fact that a lot of people just feel that they've just been picked up and thrown into a different space, obviously with no warning, and just trying to find their way through that. I'm just giving people time to type, and it's really interesting reading some of these. Siloed practice in different areas, not much whole institution vision. Yeah, that's very interesting as well. Yeah. Casey, you've made a really good point there. We assume all our students can access them or have the facilities to use them. That's quite interesting. One of the major broadband providers, up until quite recently, had a protection on there. It was something you could turn on to filter out certain content on your home broadband, but it also blocked out all of Google Chrome, Google Drive. Information videos and things, and it was a real difficulty that we noticed. I only noticed it because my children's school were trying to send home, so we're trying to send home recorded material, so that we're creating this content and using tools or preparing content for the students, assuming that they can all access it, and that's not always the case. Yeah, Kevin. Yeah.
Zach, I think something that Melanie's just brought up as well, which I'm sure we're all going to agree with, and that is the massive move towards video calls since the lockdown.
Yeah.
I think that, in a sense, one of the good things that has come out of this horrible situation is that it has forced others to move out of a zone that they might have otherwise been a little bit uncomfortable with. I think everybody's familiar with Zoom quizzes with the family and friends and things like that outside of work, but it's certainly moved much more towards the use of video and synchronous delivery, which again is something that was less so before the lockdown. So certainly lessons to be learnt from that as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think Ben's brought up a good comment there, saying always fascinated by the tensions between freedom to choose and enforced use of tools. And we'll talk about that a bit in a bit, Ben. I'm really glad you brought that up. Thank you. Okay, we'll just let the last few come in there, and then we are debating about video in classrooms or not. Do we need to? That's a really interesting question, Tara. Tara, do you mean for students that are on campus and some not? How you could just unpack that a little more if you could. Yes, yeah, yeah. That's always an interesting one, Tara. I think, and it's difficult. It's very difficult to try and get the same experience across for the students that are out of the classroom and the students that are in the classroom. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Oh, go on, John. Sorry.
I was just going to say just an important point that comes with the video that Tara's just talking about there is that we're all aware as well as the policies around the use of lecture capture, whatever term you want to use for it. So this particular time is an example of a time where people could be forced down a route without considering all of the ramifications around it, and having the correct policies agreed and signed off by students, staff, and all the other appropriate bodies is equally as important as actually asking the question, do we need to be videoing or not? So worth considering those as well, definitely.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Right, thank you ever so much for that. We'll have a few more questions in a bit along the same sort of thing, but that's great. Thank you for that. But as we've seen in a few of the comments that were there, the move to online teaching, online teaching and learning, has shifted the game into a very different space. It has been a complete and utter change of direction. And the rules that many of us lived and worked by moved off into a different direction. Even for those of us who are used to working from home, like John and I, it's a very different game to have everyone else home too. I think moving to this site B, should we call it, is a surefire guarantee that one of my children isn't going to run into the meeting today. So that's one good thing. But it means that the traditional methods of teaching and interacting with students are not as accessible, if at all. And it feels like quite a long time ago that the students were learning in rooms together with that face-to-face learning experience. And also being very aware of those who usually teach in studios or in studio spaces or labs. There are institutions that have students that are isolated from their peers, but also the practical side of their studies. And they have to rely on their teaching staff to adapt teaching practice almost completely. And the reason I say that is my wife is a lecturer at an arts institution and is used to teaching with inks, dyes, heat presses, exposing machines, and everything else involved in screen printing. And she's now delivering her sessions from our kitchen table on a laptop using video clips and images to cover where the practical sessions were timetabled to be. So, and that's a really good example that, for many educators, losing the comfort of those familiar teaching spaces and equipment has been, quite unnerving, and including for the students. It could be a big step outside of the comfort zone to be on camera or using a microphone. Engaging in group discussions online could be quite clunky and difficult to get momentum, particularly if students aren't used to that environment. And teaching staff may be setting up tasks or collaborations using tools and techniques that they haven't used before, and they suddenly need to rely solely on an ability to deliver their curriculum online. So how do educators and organizations move forward effectively? Whether you're a practitioner yourself or in a department that supports your teaching teams, one of the questions you must be thinking to yourself all the time is, how do you build confidence with digital practice? Some of you may have seen the JISC digital experience insight survey, but there's quite a few interesting questions in there, and that are quite relevant to where we find ourselves in the COVID situation. I think John's just put the link into the report for 2019. It does have some really good points in there. Obviously, just remember this survey was 2019, so it's before the coronavirus. But looking at the numbers, over a quarter of both HE and FE students who were asked had never worked online with others. Looking at the numbers for gaming or polling or formats outside of Word or PowerPoint, it's quite clear that a good portion of these students and the staff teaching them had not regularly or ever been exposed to using digital tools as part of their learning and teaching. In the last webinar, one of the attendees grabbed the mic and shared a conversation that they had with an academic. And this is quite interesting. I saw Angela had said something quite similar. And this academic had been through a few weeks of training to get up to speed with delivering everything online. And it sounded like it had been quite a tiring experience for everyone. Yeah, everyone learning all the new tools and things. And it was a moment of awakening that they realized that this is what the tools are for. They stopped seeing it as tech for the sake of tech that IT services has always been trying to get them to use. It was actually there to support pedagogy. And this has brought some very exciting conversations about how the academics at that university were now viewing the tools. It's a good time to think about whether you've had any similar experiences at your institution. So I think John's going to bring up another question box here, and the question is, and there was a couple of comments in the last box about, are staff or students reacting differently now to using online tools that they hadn't engaged with before? More panic, more distilled panic, Ben. Robin, that's an interesting. Yes, I think that's a great comment. For some, it's a revelation. For others, it's a barrier. Yeah, Chris, your comment there. I might be in an unusual situation, and it's just scrolled off. I can't read it. Unusual situation working mostly with staff who support. Oh, there's too many coming in. It's just but you say that some staff mostly delighted to be shifting to online. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to grab the mic there, Chris, and just explain a little bit about what it was like before, and how they're sharing that. Chris, I can see you typing. Sorry, I don't seem to have like access. No problem at all. No problem at all, Chris. John, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to highlight again, highlighting the communication that we've been getting from our members, and I think we've mentioned it before in previous webinars. But one of the key issues is a lack of clarity from the top, and that's not to suggest that people aren't trying. But certainly one of the issues that we are seeing time and time again at the moment is that lack of clarity about the types of what tools are going to be used and what we're expecting from them, so that at least staff and students are clear on the use of the tools. Because, for example, we see quite a lot of confused use with the virtual learning environment. Some institutions use it as purely a learning environment, and others use it as a kind of mix of intranet, message board, and learning environment. Now, in these times, if you're not 100% clear, anyone, and which is most people who aren't in the same room or the same building, it can be very, very easy to become cut off and confused and feel out of the loop. So clarification about what the tools are to be used for, it's certainly something that we've been advocating with the contact we've had with members.
Yeah, thanks, John. I was just reading Katie's comment there. However, there are still pockets of students who are really struggling to transition to this new independent way of working. I think that's very true. I think we're seeing that when we're speaking to a lot of members, that it is we're thinking a lot about staff using digital tools, but a lot of the time it is a step out of the comfort zone for students who often thrive on the interactions they have with their peers in that student experience and in that student environment. And it's just working hard to making sure that what we're using does encourage and build confidence for our students as well as the staff. Tracy, that's a good point. Students always say they would prefer more interaction from staff regarding tech tools, even before COVID-19. Canvas seen an increase in quizzes. Tracy, it's quite interesting. I wonder if your staff feel that they're answering the students better now. Is it been a real positive move for your staff?
Zach, while we just wait to see if Tracy can grab the mic, I just thought I'd highlight a comment there that Ben was saying about the use of the VLE, and again goes along the lines of what we've been suggesting, and that is that the use of tools, particularly at this time, we're seeing much better results where institutions are using existing tools better than actually going out and buying new ones for this situation. It sounds relatively obvious, but we've been quite amazed how it's clearly not. So getting better out of what you've already got allows you to focus on getting the most out of those tools, and that scaffolding and framework, which Ben mentions, is very, very true. So looking at what you've got and getting the most out of it is definitely helped most of our members move forward quicker than those that have maybe gone out and purchased a new tool or moved to something completely different from what they were doing before.
Hi, yeah, Edward's just mentioned that the microphone button is available at the top there. So if anyone did want to put their hand up and speak, that I believe it is now working. Brilliant. Right. Thank you very much for that. That's great. There's some really great really great comment there. And these comments that you give to us are fantastic for us to go back and really understand and take your opinion. So thank you for adding to them. That's brilliant. Okay. We wanted to think about the tools that we're using, and Ben made quite a good point just a minute ago about what tools we have and does it matter. And we wanted to frame some of the thoughts around using tools and how to move forward. Any user will want to have the right tools available to complete their job. There will be different versions of the same tool that are specific to particular tasks. I'm just starting to learn wood turning, and there are plenty of tools that will cut into the wood, but depending on the wood and the cut I want to make, there will be a wrong tool and a right tool. And there will be a fair amount of reading, practice, and understanding of the tool's capability and design I need to do to learn my craft. And this is much like the array of digital tools available right now for teaching and learning. The right tool for the job can make a huge difference. And the result of an organization providing tools and platforms that aren't suitable can have a huge effect on the user experience from an educator's and a student's point of view, and it can have a real impact on confidence. And innovation is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and we talk about it with our members, and we often hear that members say, could we be more innovative? And like I say, it's a wonderful word when thinking about teaching and learning and engaging with digital, but sometimes innovation is aimed for at the cost of thoughtful use. Um, I'm probably gonna get everyone sounding off the klaxons here, but do you remember when Second Life was a buzz term in education? And at the university I was working for about 15 years ago, there were lots of taught sessions that were set up in Second Life that didn't really work because while it was innovative to teach in such a space, it was done for innovative sake, just to be innovative, and the learning was getting lost. Yeah, I can see some people in the comments. Yeah, we remember those times with a little bit of laughter, I think. So picking the right tool is one of the bigger factors to a successful adoption of digital tools. And sometimes it feels like a new tool is found, released, or shared on Twitter or something like that, and everyone dives for it, and it becomes a real buzzword. And it's like like getting a new hammer, and we all start looking for something to hit with it, rather than understanding why a digital solution is needed and which tools can answer the specific problem that we have. To begin with, I mean, it's a great idea for educators to explore what tools are available from within the organisation first. What elements of the VLE have they not explored? Asking colleagues and learning technologists if there are examples of good practice from within the institution, using those supported tools. In many of the VLE reviews that John and I run, there is always a discussion around how much of the VLE or other internal services that aren't used to their full potential. There are often discussions where staff have said that they've shied away from learning how to use them, and many staff stick to the familiar tools like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint because because they're comfortable with them. I was reading Kevin's comment there. Yeah, many staff use the word innovative without any real substance or context. I think that's very true. And also getting motivation to what I said, Tara. Yeah, Tara, did you want to come in and comment on that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Um, it's interesting. I'm from Shipley College, and I think we're the smallest college in England.
Yeah.
And we've had in the past before COVID, well before COVID, dinosaurs of technology, etc.
Yeah.
And then those that fly with it. And then we basically took up G Suite for Education, and that kind of kept us up there with the technology. We don't use a traditional VLE as such.
Yeah.
We use Google Classroom, Google Sites, and Drive. And I appreciate because we're a small college, it's easier to do. But my kind of concept was that if we had the infrastructure, which was Google, that
Yeah.
tutors could go out and find something that was relevant and practical for their cohort or program, and
Yeah.
it would kind of integrate with G Suite.
Yeah.
I think we're really really lucky that we've been able to do that. So if,
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you very much for that. I noticed there's a couple of other people that are using Google as their infrastructure and the digital platform. I wonder if they're seeing the same thing, seeing the same sort of experience with their educators. Great if people can put into the chat.
and just to say that those technology dinosaurs have kind of been dragged along,
Yeah,
because the students want to use it as well. So this is
that,
before COVID. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. But I'll stop talking now.
Tara, thank you so much for that. It's very true. It is very true. As I say, John and I do a lot of VLE reviews with FE and HE institutions, and there is always the staff that are reluctant to move ahead with with the technology that maybe the institution are wanting to use. And it's all about unpacking what their reluctance is and where their barriers are. And we'll talk a little bit about barriers in a minute, but it's all about confidence, and it's all about familiarity and just bringing them up slowly. I just pop back to it's about deciding on what tools and techniques to invest such time. It can be quite hard. Just as Tara was saying, there are people that are struggling to maybe to find that motivation. Particularly when time is quite hard to come by, and balancing the effort that's needed to learn something new against what value it could bring is quite often a hard sell with many educators who I don't want to call them dinosaurs, but maybe feeling a little bit dinosaur-like. But many organizations will have an array of supported tools that are available, which can be used quite safely and securely. And what's quite good about using supported tools is that there's quite often either resources produced by the organization, or there's someone at the end of an email that can come and help. And we kind of have a question here. Is the question that we'll bring up now is does your institution have a space where you can go and get help, like help videos, or do you need to contact someone and say, oh, I need help with this, or anything like that? Are there like self-help materials? Angela, I see that you started to move people over from your VLE to Teams, but we've had to move everyone a lot quicker. It'd be interesting to hear how that went, if you or how that's going. If you put it into the chat, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, Zach, actually, I was going to ask Angela more about that as well. Just to kind of reiterate some of the things that Zach was saying, one of the main things that we discover from our virtual learning environment reviews and other work is that predominantly we see quite a number of institutions that will move from one platform to another, but they don't spend enough time considering the practice and how that will develop from one platform to another. So what I'm saying is sometimes we see movement to a new platform thinking that will solve all the problems. In actual fact, it was the practice remains the same, but is in a new glorified platform, and 6 months down the line you've got similar issues that you had before. So it'd be interesting, Angela and others, if you've spent some time and focused on that, what practice was seen as good and developing, and have you been able to move that across, and what have you been able to leave behind, or have you considered that or not? It'd be interesting to find out more if anyone's got any thoughts or experiences on that issue.
I think Tara's comment there, I am the space. I think that's brilliant. And we see that in a lot of organizations, across FE and HE, is that there are people that are on call, and that's what's quite great about using supported tools. Maybe not always for the person who is the space. I'm just going to move us on in a minute or so. Let's just get these last few comments in there. I'm just aware that time is pushing on for us here.
Zach, I just pick up on a comment by Joe. Joe mentions that they use buddies within departments. Again, that's something we've seen a lot that's actually been reduced in the last number of years. I've noticed particularly at institutions where there were kind of champions and buddies. That's something that's been reduced and has had quite a profound effect at those institutions. So, within the confines of this short conversation, the use of buddies has predominantly been a positive one, and when it's gone, the staff really, really notice it.
Yeah. And there's a mention of lynda.com there as well, and over the years that's been a fantastic resource to help staff. I'm going to move on just because I am aware of time, so sorry if you're still typing. The important thing really is in the last slide I said, does it matter? And I think, yes, it does matter, but it matters more to be thinking about how those tools that you have at your disposal are being used and supported. And it's also, those institutions that have been delivering successful distance learning programs will already have good experiences to share, and it'd be interesting to hear how people are tapping into those sort of resources. But we want to think a little bit about how when you move away from the supported internal tools and into the third-party tool sort of area, and thinking about the third-party tools or external tools, whatever you call them, think about how much planning goes into those decisions. As I've probably said a few times, it is important to be thinking about what you want a tool to do. Does it need to bridge that gap, or does it need to replace something that didn't work before, possibly before coronavirus? And often we hear that third-party tools can offer creativity in developing the curriculum, but some tools also allow incredible engagement opportunities. And with the right planning, the learning with these tools can be very effective. But now with the coronavirus, and in the future when the sector returns to welcoming students back on campus, how do you decide which ones to use? It can feel like looking for a needle in a haystack, or in fact, it can feel like looking for a needle in a stack of almost identical needles, especially for those who haven't been engaged in developing digital elements in their teaching already. There are various sites that list tools for educational use. Top Tools for Learning, for example, offers a list of the most common tools based on recommendations from practitioners and is up to date each year. I think John's just put a link in the chat there. But what criteria do you use when you want to select a tool? And Ben, who's on the call, who's a previous colleague of mine at an institution in Plymouth, which is Plymouth Marjon University, responded to a brilliant response to the tweet when I asked the question on Twitter. And he said, on first seeing the tool, will it do what I think it should? Can I use it in a number of ways? Will it be easy for the students to access, particularly around the logins? Are other peers using it? And can I produce something in 15 minutes? So those are sort of questions that Ben asks of a tool when he's searching for a tool. So I thought it'd be quite an interesting question to ask you is what process you go through when looking for a third-party tool. Maybe that's for your own practice, or whether that's for use in your institution. John, if you could bring up the question there, that would be great. So if you could give us an idea of the process you or your organisation goes through when looking for a tool to engage with students.
I think, Zach, this will be really revealing to see what the responses are here, because it will be interesting to see if anyone's got a specific process that they do go through. Also beyond what I would say an IT process, an IT purchasing process, which we often find is very well embedded. We often see a disconnect between that side of it and actually the kind of learning and teaching pedagogy side of it. So should be some interesting responses here.
It'd be quite good also to put if since being in the coronavirus situation and teaching online, is whether that has changed your criteria at all.
I think it's worth stressing as well, Zach, that there is no perfect right in this question that we have. So no one's going to say anything that's completely wrong or perfectly right. So everybody's entitled to have their own approach, and there'll be things that you can take from someone else's approach that you might want to use in your approaches. But there are certainly those that often lack the full holistic view of an entire organisation. So that's an issue we often see.
Joe, that's a really interesting comment. Each teacher engages with students in a different way. Sometimes the best tool is a phone to call their parents. I think that's a really interesting comment, that.
I see that Susan uses a survey for her tutors, learners and stakeholders and coordinate the responses to see what they get from that. Such a simple thing to do, and I wonder how many of our colleagues here do a similar thing. But a very good thing to do, definitely.
Kev, that's brilliant. Yeah, start with identifying what is the problem we're trying to solve. I think that's something that that's one of the messages that I'm trying to put into this session is to really understand why you want that tool and what gaps do you need to bridge with it. Yeah, Chris, you're a bit wary of using unsupported tools, and that's very true. Yeah, and that's something I'll mention in a minute, actually. Yeah.
Just worth highlighting Thomas Gilbert's comment at the end there, particularly where he says we aim for fewer well-used tools, and that would definitely be echoed from us at JISC. We definitely advocate that where possible. We have seen a real increase in the amount of tools, particularly in this time, which is understandable because of the times we're in, but using fewer tools well has always seemed to be a much better approach for many people and institutions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, there's some great comments in here. Again, I'm really sorry to cut short. I know we're keeping an eye on the clock, so we do need to move on a little bit. I'll just give you a minute or so just to finish typing that off.
I think it's worth just pointing out, Zach, from flicking through some of these really great suggestions, and thank you everyone telling us what they do. Some do have a process, and others don't. So it's certainly a mixed bag from the people that we've got on the call today about whether they have a process for the purchasing of these tools or not, which is in itself interesting to know.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks. Oh, Tara, you've just read my next slide. That's fantastic. John, what we'll do is we'll just drop that box there. And honestly, Tara didn't know what my next slide was going to be, but it's important to think about how we're using our tools and what we're using our tools for. Yeah, and as a key point in the planning of how you're going to use the tool, curriculum design is an important element of any teaching planning, but it shouldn't be overlooked when we're trying to implement digital tools. The COVID-19 circumstances forced the sector into this model of 100% online, but poor planning of introducing tools or just throwing them in could be really counterproductive to the learning. And there should be really good reason for any tool use, not just because it's digital. And it's also important to find a tool that's a good fit for the job that you're looking to fulfill. Like Tara says, a square peg in a round hole will leave gaps, and trying to deal with those students or processes that fall through the gaps can be quite difficult to manage. As the use of the digital tools and platforms and uses of tools develop in our organizations, teams, or in our individual teaching, there's this digital ecosystem that's evolving around the pedagogy, supporting it, underpinning it, and enhancing it. And this poses some questions around the implications of a growing ecosystem. How do our institutions keep track, manage, and support the staff requirements? And there was a couple of comments in the last question about being wary about using different tools that aren't supported. And with the possibility of an endless arrival of third-party tools, the task for our IT and learning technology teams can be quite overwhelming. And when we speak to leadership teams, we often hear that the balance the institution faces is that they want to feed the enthusiasm and creativity of their teaching teams. Yet those teaching teams need to know what risks each new tool could bring. And that brings us on, to thinking about the barriers and why a particular tool may not be a good choice. And decisions need to be made around how suitable a tool is, and this will depend on the policies set out by the organisation. And I've called them barriers here, but they shouldn't always. That's not always a negative. Understanding the reasons why a tool may not be able to be used, can help educators build confidence in using the ones that they can use. I think, and we've got another question for you here is how do you verify that the tool that you may pick or you may choose or you want to use, how do you check that is safe to use within your institution and with your students? That's a great comment, Ben. Thank you.
I think some of the issues that we see are particularly around GDPR and accessibility. They're two of the main issues that comes up, particularly when a department or a member of staff has kind of gone off at a tangent and started using something without going through a process like we were talking about a moment ago. So I'm expecting those to come up, I'd imagine.
Joe, that's a really good point, particularly with the explosion of Zoom. Research the IT press, publicise the issues, particularly in this one about Zoom bombing, and remind staff about data protection. I think there was, when everyone jumped onto some particular platforms, there was an explosion of use, and whether that platform was ready for that kind of use, and whether that's something that the users what we're talking about, the educators, were using it in a way that was safe for the institution and safe for our students. I think it wasn't covered completely by all the users, and maybe some checks weren't done that maybe should have been done. Yeah, Steve, like I say, you're not allowed to use Zoom. It's all, everything has to require approval. Yeah.
I think an interesting point here, Zach, as well, connected to this, is we often forget about the other end. So when should a tool now be turned off? When should it be removed? And I know it's not the question here, but it's worth asking yourself in your institution, do you have a process for basically turning off a tool that's now not used anymore efficiently or correctly or isn't safe? We often find that no is the answer. We think about how we get these tools and how we get them in place. We don't often think about how we actually turn them off. But separate question to this, but an interesting point to think about. Do you do that at your institution?
Yeah, thanks, John. I see that Chris says here, if I do want to use something, I ask the learning technology team if there's any reason why I shouldn't. I think it should be interesting to hear what your learning technology team come back with, Chris. There's a lot of comments here say that IT have the overall decision. It's difficult sometimes when they cannot see why we should at least try the tool. I think that's an interesting point. We, again, in our VLE reviews, we've had discussions with teaching teams who say that decisions are made about a particular tool based on its security or based on the settings on it or something like that. But the teaching staff are saying, but this is about pedagogy, and it's where there's IT teams. There needs to be a balance between the IT teams and the pedagogy, and find out why things should or shouldn't be used. And I think that's an important discussion to have with lots of tools. Just reading through some of these.
Angela makes a good point there, Zach, about how when Facebook was starting to be used in education, and many institutions had to kind of pull that back because it just took off, and people would often use it. I work quite closely with a number of academics who were using it because they felt frustrated with the institutional tools weren't providing them with what they wanted to provide. Quite often it's that kind of closer connection to their students and knowing that they're really going to use and engage in the tool. And Facebook would do that for them. But there's many issues around that, as we all know. But some institutions do use it and use it well. So it's all again about policy and what the institution says is safe to do so and how to use it.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That's really important. Yeah, I think many tools have a cost attached, and that's an obvious barrier. But some are free, but they require personal data from the users. And when these sort of situations happen, it does, it could put educators off using them. And this is where institutional policies come into play. I think we've had a few comments about it saying, I tend to use this, and maybe until I'm told not to, or I'll ask the learning technology team. But it's worth considering the policies that your institution has on third-party tools. And it's interesting to know, to think about whether if you know what your institution policies are. And it's vital that a tool that you use, has to comply with the policies. We often do speak to organisations, and we find that tools are being used that they weren't aware of, and it puts them in a difficult situation. Those organisational policies will be purposely written to ensure that students, staff, and the institution itself are not put at risk. Like John was saying, is the tool GDPR compliant? Does it comply with accessibility standards? Those are two massive things that, with using digital tools at the moment, or with using anything with our students. Who owns the data that is used within the tool, and what action can be taken if there is an incident, whether it's data breach, bullying, or a wellbeing issue. And it's not a question that we're going to put into a box, but it's probably a question for you to think about. Is do you know how to check your policies? So if you do go and use the tool, are you working within the constraints of those policies? And that's looking at it from an organisational point of view. As I said, we've worked with organisations where the management are finding out, while in some cases while we're there, which tools some of the staff are using, and and all of a sudden there's a little bit of panic, and there's it required action that caused changes to be made mid-term, and that made things quite difficult for the teaching staff, and it made things quite difficult for the students. The college needed to define their policies around the tools more clearly, but also the enthusiastic educators didn't check to see whether they should or they shouldn't use the tool. And that brings us really onto the last part of what we're thinking about really here, and how with regard to if you've moved through all the tools and you want to use a tool, you've checked that it's okay to use, you think it'll work really, really well, how do you check with your users, whether that be students or whether it be teaching staff, how are they engaging with that tool? And how do you collect that feedback? How would you think you would collect that kind of information from? Would you get it through analytics? Would you get it from feedback and things? And, it's a common concept to be using feedback to refine and inform decisions around what works in curriculum design. But through our work with members, we often hear that educators don't ask for direct feedback on elements like the digital tools being used. And collecting that feedback, to add the support to the digital practice of your educators could be key in successfully using tools, particularly during the coronavirus lockdown, but also after the students return to campus. I think it's quite important to really engage with your students and find out, say, we're working with this, we're using this tool, is this tool working for you? And if the students are reacting well to the use of the digital tools, then this could easily be used as a benchmark for future use, particularly when everyone's back on campus. So, it's quite an important point to be thinking about moving forward and continued use. And I think the last question we have here is do you see a continued use of digital tools when the students return? I know we're down to our last 4 minutes, so we'll quickly go for quick fire answers here. I hope so. Yeah, Tom, I do too. Yeah, there's some really positive answers here. Yes, definitely. Fantastic. That's fantastic. Please do keep on typing here. John will leave the box up here for a minute. But I think it's quite interesting to see that the opportunities with innovation, but the opportunities there for educators and technologists and students and organisations as a whole to continue with this momentum. My colleague Chris Thompson writes in the responding to coronavirus blog post, and the blog post was called "After the Emergency: What Happens After Lockdown Ends." I think John's going to put in a link there to the blog post. And he says, take the time to recognize what people have achieved. The solutions to the crisis will have been imperfect, but we need to acknowledge the collective effort that went into responding so quickly and in such radical ways. So where tools were thrown at educators or thrown at students, collectively it was teaching still continues, and the sensible use of tools and the sensible choosing of tools and the sensible cementing of practice and culture in moving forward, I think it can be really appreciated, but hopefully it's all cemented and it will continue online. I mean, it's good to see some comments here say yes, it will be the new normal. It's a key employability skill. Yes, Claire, it absolutely is, and we need to harness the learning. I like that. I agree. We cannot go back now. Yeah, Angela, absolutely. And I think we're down to our last couple of minutes here, and I think it's a good time to say, thank you very much for all those comments. They are absolutely fantastic. They're really useful to us in how we help institutions move forward with using digital practice and things like that. I think that John, if you could just drop the question box out of the. Thank you. The last thing really is to say that there's lots more information on responding to coronavirus on the coronavirus page on the JISC website. There's also a blog which has fantastic posts around using digital tools and teaching online. There's recordings from other webinar sessions like this. This recording from this session we'll put onto the page as well. And yeah, there's post there about well-being, accessibility, and planning, and things like that. There's also a community. I think John's going to put into the into the chat there, and there's a community on of lots of institutions dealing with coronavirus, and there's lots of knowledge being shared on there as well. So please feel free to join that community too. We're bang on time. I just want to say thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for your input into this session. I hope it's been useful for you. Thanks to Edward. Thanks to John as well. I think we've had we've spent an hour well there. I think that's been really useful. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you all. Everyone have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Stay safe.